In this episode, we're going to separate the facts from the fiction in the film Green Book, starring Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali. To do that, we have to travel back to 1962 during the Civil Rights era. So climb on board. This is Green Book, History versus Hollywood. In the movie Green Book, Viggo Mortensen portrays Italian-American nightclub bouncer Tony Lip. Lip worked at the famous Copacabana nightclub in New York City. In 1962, the club was going to close for a short time to go under renovations. During that time, Lip was out of work. He accepted a job driving a black pianist through the Deep South. That pianist was Don Shirley, portrayed by Mahershala Ali in the film. The two couldn't have been more opposite. Shirley was a refined classical pianist, and Lip was a gruff bouncer from the Bronx with an attitude. They certainly wouldn't have been natural friends, but Shirley needed protection and a driver, and Lip seemed like the right man for the job. And so they embarked on their journey together, a journey that in the film takes up about 2 months' time. In real life, the journey lasted about a year and a half off and on. They did go home on a Christmas break, but after that break that's seen in the movie, they actually went back on the road together again. One of the screenwriters on the film was Nick Vallelonga, who was actually Tony Lip's real-life son, and he says that this condensing of time in the film is the only major creative license that the filmmakers took. And for that reason, some events in the film don't happen in the same cities they did in real life or the dates that they did in real life. Another point to mention early on is that most articles state that Don Shirley was born in Kingston, Jamaica. This isn't true, and it stems from the fact that his promoters falsely advertised him as having been born in Jamaica. The true story reveals that Don Shirley was born in Pensacola, Florida on January 29, 1927. His parents were Jamaican immigrants. His father Edwin was an Episcopal priest, and his mother Stella worked as a teacher. Tragically, Stella died when Shirley was only 9 years old. Don Shirley first started playing around age 2 or 3, playing the organ in his father's church. He first started playing professionally around age 18, playing with the Boston Pops, performing Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1 in B-flat. It's true that as a young man, Shirley did have dreams of becoming a classical concert pianist. However, those around him, including theater producer Saul Herrick, told Shirley that no one would want to see a black pianist on the concert stage. Shirley wasn't the only black artist to be denied the opportunity to become a concert pianist. Nina Simone, for example, had similar aspirations to become a classical concert pianist, but she was denied the opportunity. Despite Shirley not being able to fulfill his dream, this by no means held him back. He was able to create his own sound by blending classical music with jazz and other types of pop music. So instead of playing works that were mostly composed by others, he was able to play works that were all his own. This is the point that Viggo Mortensen's character stresses in the movie, and it's an important point to note. You can hear his unique sound in songs like I Can't Get Started, Blue Moon, or Lullaby of Birdland, some of which are featured in the film. Now we turn our attention to Tony Lip, whose real name was Frank Anthony Vallelonga. He got the nickname Lip because by the age of 8, he had become a skillful BSer. He had the ability to talk his way into or out of anything. It was a skill that he would utilize his entire life. Before his days working as a nightclub bouncer, Lip had been in the United States Army. He had been stationed in post-war Germany in the early 1950s. In an early scene in the film, Lip's brother-in-law, portrayed by comedian Sebastian Maniscalco, takes him to a diner to compete in a hot dog eating contest. Lip wins the contest by eating 26 hot dogs in one sitting. Lip's real-life son, Nick Vallelonga, said that this indeed happened in real life. It was an impressive feat, but certainly not a way for Lip to make a living. In another scene, we see Lip throw away 2 drinking glasses that had been used by black repairmen in his home. There's no evidence that this scene happened in real life, but according to his son Nick Vallelonga, he was indeed a racist prior to his trip with Don Shirley. This is further emphasized in the film as we see Lip make stereotypical assumptions about what types of food Shirley likes to eat and what type of music he likes to listen to. In the movie, Tony Lip goes for an interview and meets Don Shirley for the first time in an apartment above Carnegie Hall. This might seem strange, but it's actually true. There are apartments or were apartments above Carnegie Hall, and Don Shirley lived in one of these apartments for more than 50 years. But as you can imagine, at times this must have been difficult for Shirley, living above the very stage that the color of his skin had kept him from performing on. He did play on Carnegie Hall stage once a year with his trio, and in 1955 he played piano on the stage for the debut of Duke Ellington's New World A-Comin'. As seen in the image, Don Shirley's apartment was certainly lavish and extravagant and filled with gaudy decor. More of his Carnegie Hall apartment can be seen in the documentary Lost Bohemia. Before we talk about the tour, we should probably talk about the film's title, Green Book. The title comes from the Negro Motorist Green Book. It was a segregation-era guidebook which alerted African American motorists to the hotels, restaurants, and garages that offered service to blacks. The Green Book also pointed out what were known as sundown towns. These were towns which prohibited blacks from being outside after nightfall. In the film, we see Tony Lip and Don Shirley driving through one such town and they get pulled over. It's an important inclusion in the movie, as I think most people today are unaware that such places existed. The Green Books themselves were named after their publisher, a man by the name of Victor H. Green. They were available at gas stations, selling as many as 15,000 copies per year. They were first published in 1936, and they continued to be published annually for the next 30 years. In the movie, we see Tony Lip and Don Shirley use the Green Books they traveled through the South, which is true to real life. Early on, Don Shirley tells Tony Lip to make sure there's always a Steinway piano available at each venue for him to play on. Later in the movie, Lip is checking out a venue and he discovers a broke-down piano with garbage inside of it. When he confronts the man at the venue about where the Steinway is, the man basically responds, "Does it really matter what kind of piano a black man plays on?" Lip doesn't back down and insists that the man have the Steinway delivered. The man complains that it's over 50 miles away. Lip responds that if the Steinway is not there by the time of the concert, then there'll be no concert. The man begrudgingly gives in, and the Steinway arrives in time for Shirley's performance. The scene was indeed inspired by a real-life incident. The real Tony Lip said that when he arrived at the venue, he opened up the piano and saw chicken bones inside. He told the person at the venue that if a Steinway wasn't there by 8 o'clock, then they weren't doing the concert. Lip said that he felt like he was being insulted himself. The closest Steinway was 40 to 50 miles away, but his insistence paid off and the piano arrived in time. The difference from the movie is that in real life, Lip never mentions a man at the venue making a racial remark. He recalled the venue being at a high school, which likely didn't have a better piano on hand. Still, the high school had to have known about Don Shirley's request for a Steinway piano, and leaving him a piano with garbage inside can certainly lead us to make the same conclusions the movie does. One of the lighter scenes in the movie is when Tony Lip is writing a letter home to his wife, Dolores. He's at a picnic table eating lunch with Don Shirley. Shirley notices him writing the letter and asks if he can read it. Shirley then offers his assistance. Dolores receives the letter and she's visibly moved by its poetic sentiments. Deep down, she knows her husband likely had some help, but she doesn't care. It means a lot to her. It's what she needed to hear while being separated from her husband. According to Tony Lip's son, Nick Vallelonga, the letters are based on actual letters that Tony Lip wrote to Dolores. It's true that at times the letters were co-authored by Don Shirley.
Kentucky Fried Chicken. In Kentucky! When's that ever gonna happen?
Another lighter scene in the movie is when Don Shirley and Tony Lip are driving along the highway, and Lip offers Shirley a piece of fried chicken. Shirley is disgusted by the notion of eating food with his hands, especially greasy fried chicken, and Lip is astonished that Shirley has never had fried chicken before. While the scene is most likely fiction and played for comedy, it's supposedly true that Shirley refused to pick up food with his hands.
Yet we found no evidence that Shirley had never actually tried fried chicken, or that the scene happened at all.
A refined virtuoso, Don Shirley spoke with an upper-class enunciation, which he tried to encourage Tony Lip to do. This seems pretty in line with the true story from what we know. Tony Lip's lack of refinement is on display in the movie again after he punches a police officer when the officer calls him a derogatory name for Italians. The incident leads to both Lip and Shirley being arrested and put in jail. Shirley uses his one phone call to get a message to then Attorney General Robert Kennedy, who helps get them out of jail. In real life, the arrest didn't happen when it does in the movie. It happened a year later in the fall of 1963. So this is after the Christmas break at the end of the movie, when Shirley went back on tour again. Shirley really did get a message to Robert Kennedy, who helped get them out of jail. And though it's not shown in the film, Shirley took time out from his tour to attend President John F. Kennedy's funeral. Don Shirley was a private man, and not a whole lot is known about his personal life and relationships. We do know that Don Shirley was married and divorced. He was married to a woman named Jean. The reason for the divorce, he said, had nothing to do with lust. It had to do with the fact that here I had the opportunity to have a career, and God knows that's just something I always wanted, trained for it all my life. I didn't have the constitution to do a husband act as well as a concert pianist act, because I was dead set on being what I had been trained all my life to be. From what we know, it was sometime after his divorce that Shirley discovered he was gay, and he never officially came out of the closet. In fact, the only evidence that's known about his sexuality is the story that Tony Lip told about the incident at the YMCA. Tony Lip's real-life account was fairly in line with the movie. A state trooper called him and told him to come to the YMCA. However, unlike the movie, He didn't arrive and find Don Shirley naked and chained to a shower bar with another man beside him. He never mentioned Shirley being undressed upon his arrival. He simply said that Shirley told him that he had hit on 3 guys. Shirley offered no more details. The 2 state troopers wanted to arrest Shirley, but like in the movie, Tony Lip was able to bribe them with $200, telling them to go buy themselves a couple of suits. So while the scene is mostly true, it's clearly been over-dramatized for the film. Throughout the film, we see Don Shirley as a sort of tortured soul who's isolated himself from others. To deal with his loneliness, he downs an entire bottle of scotch on each day of the tour. This was reportedly true, and it's also what makes his friendship with Tony Lip so unique. He had let someone else into his life, even if it wasn't exactly voluntary. There is audio of Don Shirley stating that his relationship with Tony Lip was more than just a business one. At the end of the movie, Don Shirley comes to Lip's house and meets his family on Christmas Day. In real life, Tony Lip and Don Shirley would travel for another year together, to Canada too. Tony Lip's son, Nick Vallelonga, recalled Shirley being a very special human being. He said that he was meticulous, well-dressed, well-spoken, and a well-educated man. He recalled a time when Shirley gave him a gift of a pair of ice skates as a child. At the end of the movie, Tony Lip is a changed man. He had witnessed Don Shirley being discriminated and humiliated. He witnessed him not being able to eat in the restaurants where he performed or to use the restrooms. He witnessed physical acts of violence against Shirley. According to Tony Lip's son, his father's time with Don Shirley had significantly changed him as a man. It also changed the way Lip raised his children and the values he instilled in them. We get a glimpse of this impact at the end of the movie, and it's nice to know that it continued after the credits roll. So what became of the tough guy Tony Lip? Well, after his time driving Don Shirley, he did go back to work at the Copacabana nightclub in New York City. It was there that he met director Francis Ford Coppola, who gave him a small part in his 1972 movie, The Godfather. Lip would go on to star in approximately 21 other films, including Dog Day Afternoon, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and Donnie Brasco. But he is perhaps most recognizable from his role as Carmine Lupertazzi in the HBO TV series The Sopranos. As for Don Shirley, he continued to compose and perform music. In 2010, at age 83, he was kicked out of his Carnegie Hall apartment. He had been living there for more than 50 years, surrounded by fellow artists, but Carnegie Hall decided to demolish the commercial and residential studios, which in their heyday numbered as many as 170. This was done in order to create educational and rehearsal space for the hall below. Fittingly, Don Shirley made the most dramatic exit. His grand piano had to be lifted by crane out of his 12th floor apartment. He would pass away from heart disease 3 years later on April 6, 2013.